Um, Great. And Agustin de Jave is our technical person in Argentina, who makes much of this possible. So thank you. And Agustin is going to put up our slides. So if you're here, you know you're here for the IPA Journal Club featuring Dr. Dionne Powell. Next slide. And I'm Jack Drescher. If you've been here before, you know a little bit about me. Here's my bio. It's online as well. And the next slide. Uh, I'd like to introduce for the first time my co-moderator, Krista Walling, PsyD. Chris is an associate professor and chair of research psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies, faculty chair of adult psychoanalytic training at the New Center for Psychoanalysis, and a licensed clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst in California. He's also a clinical research fellow and international advisory council member at Indiana University's Kinsey Institute and serves on the American Psychoanalytics Committee on Gender and Sexuality, as well as past president of the United States Association for Body Psychotherapy. And I just read, he's going to be the 2026 Ernst and Gertrude Ticho Award, giving a lecture at the APSA meeting in San Francisco, and maintains a private practice in Brentwood. And the next slide. Just so we've had 13 previous journal clubs. They're all online, both at the IPA website and as well on the IPA's YouTube channel. Augustine will put the link in the chat for those of you who want to look at some of our past journal clubs if you haven't seen them. And Chris, you're up next.
Great. So I have the pleasure of introducing you to our speaker today, who is Dionne Powell. Dionne serves on the IPA board as the North American representative and is the first African-American descendant psychoanalyst to sit on the IPA board since its founding in 1910. She's a training and supervising psychoanalyst at Columbia University Center for Psychoanalytic Training and Research and the Psychoanalytic Association of New York. She chairs PANI's Education Committee. She's an adjunct assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia University in New York, and clinical assistant professor of psychiatry and assistant attending psychiatrist at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. She's the co-chair of the Holmes Commission on Racial Equity in American Psychoanalysis and the vice president of the American Association for Psychoanalytic Education. She's a founding member of the Black Psychoanalysts Speak and is a full-time private practice in New York City. She's written and presented extensively with recent contributions, including Becoming Raced, Psychic Consequences of Transgenerational Racial Trauma in the IGP, and In Pursuit of Racial Equity in American Psychoanalysis, Findings and Recommendations from the Holmes Commission in the American Psychoanalytic Association Journal. So welcome, Dionne. And just a few housekeeping items. Next slide. The goal of our journal club is, of course, to be interactive so that readers can speak directly with authors. So this session is being recorded, and it will be available for viewing both on the IPA website and on YouTube at a future date. If you do not wish to be recorded, please leave your camera off. However, if you are willing to play with us, we welcome that, and we would invite you to come off your camera and be in the world with us and share in some good collegial engagement. And I will therefore, nor will Jack, call on you if you are off camera. If you have questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are not using the chat function for this meeting that you might usually be accustomed to, but you can use the hand raise function on that button if you wish for us to call upon you to ask your question out loud. Next slide. When you are called upon, as a reminder, 5 years into this post the pandemic, I know sometimes we forget, please unmute yourself. Turn your video camera on if it's not already, so that when we do call upon you, you can identify yourself briefly and let us know where you're joining us from. Also, since this is an international audience, unlike what I'm doing right now, please speak slowly and clearly, as not all the people who are tuned in are going to be native English speakers. And if you haven't downloaded Dionne's paper yet, The link to do so will be posted momentarily in the chat. So hopefully you can skim it or set it to the side for later reference. Next slide.
I think,
Or is this the last one?
yeah, that's our last
Oh,
slide.
great. Fantastic.
Okay, terrific.
All right.
So, Dionne, welcome. Where are you right now?
I'm in the New York area.
Right. And Chris, you are
In Los Angeles, California.
right. And I am in a hotel in Fort Lauderdale. So ignore the artwork behind me. It has nothing to do with my husband, the artist.
Uh, Chris, can I just make two comments based on your
Please.
introduction?
Yes, please.
One is that I'm not only the first African American descendant, I'm the first African descended person, because we have to think about the diaspora in the 115-year history of the International Psychoanalytic Association. So I just want to make that distinction as opposed to it being African American.
Sure,
And
sure.
then the second is that the IJP paper is no longer in press. It's out for those to read. Hopefully as of this weekend, if you like.
Nice. Fantastic. Thank you for that.
And Dorothy, I thought you had a comment in the chat.
Oh, just a minor thing. It's the Holmes Commission on Racial Equality in American Psychoanalysis.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
We struggled around the word equity or equality, but it's equality.
Terrific. Okay. So what we like to do, what we tend to do, first we'd like to ask everybody to mute themselves so we don't have any background noise. The other thing is that Chris and I will start, with questions. We would love to hear your questions, but usually we find to get the audience started, it sort of warms things up if we begin with some questions. So I have a first question for Dionne. So this is my first question as I was reading your paper that came to mind. So speaking from personal experience, I wrote my first paper about psychoanalysis and homosexuality the year after I completed my training in 1992 at the William Allenson White Institute. It was entitled Psychoanalytic Attitudes Toward Homosexuality and was triggered by all the experience I had and things I read during my training. So I looked at your bibliography in this paper, and I saw your first listed publication on the issues of race and psychoanalysis to be in 2012, and this paper we read for today is 2018. So my question has several parts. One, what prompted you to first start writing about race? Two, how long was that first paper after you completed training? And three, why the 6-year span between the first paper and this one?
Wow. Can you remind me, Jack, what was that paper in 2012?
Oh, I have to look it up. I'll look at this. I'll tell you in 2 seconds. Hold on. It should be the paper in 2012 is Psychoanalysis in African Americans, Past, Present, and Future in a book by Salman Akhtar called
Yes.
The African American
Yes.
Experience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, it's a long topic. I'll just say this. I never took a psychology class in undergrad. I was pure math and science, pre-med science nerd. If someone told me one day that I'd become a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, I would probably have a few choice words to say to that. However, being open-minded and able to, go with the flow, and some personal observations. When I did my medical school rotation in psychiatry, I had a almost life-changing experience. I was destined to become a surgeon. Um, and that experience, and then followed by doing surgery, put me in a kind of dilemma. And they were anticipating my attendance on the rotation because they have some idea who wants to go into what field. And I told them about my experience, and they said, "Oh, you need to speak to this doctor because he is both a psychiatrist and a surgeon." And I thought that was really, really interesting. And at the time, University of Pennsylvania was doing gastric bypass surgery for the first time for weight reduction, radical surgery, very radical. And people were basically, colloquial terms, losing their minds, having very difficulty. And so I got really interested in the mind-body biopsychosocial model. But then I realized I haven't never learned anything about the mind and psychology. And I decided to take a class across the street taught by Thomas Parham, who's a professor of psychology, former president of the Black Psychologists Association. I took a year-long course on IQ testing. We read the book, Even the Rat Was White, Internal Racism, and we became lifelong friends. So when I got to Cornell to do my residency, and every single person except two were psychoanalysts, all my teachers, including inpatient. Bob Michaels out of Kernberg, Michael Sachs, Sam Perry, Marv Wasserman. The list goes on and on, Stu Ash. And I saw as these analysts were able to talk down psychotic patients, became really interested in that. But at the same time, all the things I had learned a year before was not in the curriculum. Myself and Maria Okendo were the only two people of color during the whole 4 years. And then a few years later, Beverly Stout came through. So my interest was sparked by the paucity of a kind of curriculum. And, at that time, it was the height of HIV. And I did a 2-year fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering. At the peak, we worked at Rikers Island, lots of cancer patients, lots of AIDS patients. And that also, talking about your interest, Jack, that also was not in the literature. And so my experience, which I put in my paper about working with the descendant of the Confederacy, really turned the tide for me and showed me, and a bunch of other things too, working with people. For instance, there was when I was a medical student, there was a young man who was the only English speaker in his family. And he had just gotten accepted to go away from Philadelphia to go to college. And this young man paid the bills, did all the translations for the family. But he also had seizures. And he was planned to have a frontal lobe lobotomy, to get rid of his intractable seizures. And fortunately, there was a Latinx neurology fellow and said, "Can we just interview him one more time in the double mirror room?" And they decided to interview him with his mother. And we watched as she talked about how proud she was of her son. And, but then there was some anxiety about, who's going to pay the bills, who's going to translate, what's going to happen to her family. And you could see this mixture, and he started seizing, and his EEG was completely normal. So how do psychological symptoms manifest themselves? And I've seen this over and over again, including the example I put in the paper. So I'm not sure how to explain the 6-year gap. I don't consider myself a quick writer. And also, I think I was establishing my career and doing a whole lot of other things. I have to go through my CV and see what other things I did. Teaching, I chaired the Training and Supervising Analyst Committee at Columbia. I was a faculty rep for 10 years. So there's a lot of things going on. And also just building my practice. I mean, this is work from this is work from active and clinical engagement, seeing people from as much as 4 to 5 times a week and less than. So I don't know how to explain the gap.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was a journey for me.
Mhm. Yeah, I understand. Chris, you had a question for Dionne?
Yeah. So I'm going to turn now to the paper, and I'm going to ask that we share the link in the chat in just a moment for folks who may not have received it or found a way to get it. And also for accessibility reasons, due to our non-English speakers, I'm going to post my question in the chat so people can read it as well as hear it. So in the paper, you describe psychoanalysis as collective silence around race and racism as both a defense and a limitation of our clinical relevance. And so I'm curious, in a pragmatic framing of this, what practical steps do you believe that institutes, training programs should take in order to break this silence, not just in theory, but in their day-to-day clinical and supervisory encounters? And so I'm really trying to put this silence piece up on its feet with this question.
Mm-hmm. I'm still going to start personally and then expand out, because I from my experience, the biggest limitation clinically lies within the therapist or analyst and their willingness to present themselves as a potential other, because we all are others. We hide defensively around a kind of groupthink. And you can think about that in several different ways. It can be based on religion. It can be based on race. It could be ethnicity. It could be where you were born. It could be birth order. It could be anything that makes us more comfortable with certain people and less comfortable with other people. So I think it's a defense because it stops us from leaning in and asking the dynamic questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're in front of someone else. And in this world of instant identification and instant communication, as if we know, or we can describe someone by a tweet. I remember Otto Kernberg talking about being in Meningers. And when he was there, they had to do 22-page HPIs, history of present illness, which had to include birth order, who were the grandparents, who were the community, were there frequent moves, all to get a whole gestalt about the person who's right in front of you. I think we do that less and less and less. So coming from that position, then you think about when someone is coming to an institute to train. And if they are different in any category, it could be socioeconomic, right? There's certain ways that we sort of privilege stances and ignore others. And so how to bring that in would be to be more, as Anton Hart says, radically open and curious, not in a I want to get to know you, gotcha kind of way, but in a way that lets them know that we're welcoming of all people, just like this journal club is. And for some reason, we've moved away from that as more people seek training from us. So it's a limitation because it would make people turn away. And there's someone here in this audience that I noticed that had shared in another platform, when they were trying to get to decide on their analyst. And one of the reasons the candidate said that I'm wanting to see you is because you're Jewish. And that maybe, perhaps, you would be able to appreciate, because if you appreciate your trauma, you might be able to appreciate my trauma. But the analyst said, I'm not Jewish, I'm white. And so there you see the foreclosure of trying to make these links. And so there's some people that I know that race or their ethnicity or their sexuality never was discussed. And that silence is not due, I mean, most of us, if especially me, not having any experience in the field and never taken a psychology course in undergrad, people are going to frame themselves based on what the analyst or therapist says. What is the analytic frame? What gets included and what gets excluded? And I don't think, and my example with Miss A shows that I don't think anything is off the table. Even if I wanted to demonstrate how even if I thought on familial lines that she's envious and jealous of my African descended patients. But really underneath that was so much more. And the question for us, and I can't imagine any other field that gives us the opportunity to explore on this deep level. So I think the limitations are within us. I think that there should be, to become a supervisor is not an easy thing to do. And there should be, at Columbia, I had for new training and supervising analysts, a supervisory workshop where we talk about the supervisory function, which includes how do you deal with differences or actually similarities. Marian Goldberger talks about bright spots when you were so close to the other person that you're missing out defensively on other things. So that's why I'm saying it's a defense, because there's some things that we haven't dealt with, and it makes us silent and mute. And my final, it's not an example, but something we've done recently at Columbia, and this is our second year. We did last year, 2 years ago, we piloted and worked for a year on a trauma workshop. And so we have a year-long trauma workshop, and people were open enough to say that in their analysis disconnected them from their mind and their body. So they had to have another analysis in order to deal with things that they had not dealt with. And that includes trauma. And I think our appreciation over the years of transgenerational trauma and what that does to the mind is become much more into the analytic space, the therapeutic space, a lot more than when I was in training.
We have a comment from Shakira Ford in the chat. Dr. Ford, would you like to unmute? And if you're not on, I don't see your face, speak directly with Dr. Powell.
Hi, I apologize. I'm not able to come on camera. I essentially was just thanking you, Dr. Powell, in the chat. I'm on faculty in psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Morehouse School of Medicine. And I just wanted to thank you for sharing those experiences, certainly as I see those with working with our students. And then also we've had the pleasure of having Dr. Stout for our grant rounds, but it's just so important to have that representation in that lens and how I see that play out with our students and in the people we serve. And I just wanted to basically just thank you for sharing those experiences. And thank you, Dr. Drescher, for letting me do that.
Sure. Good. Well, so I have, Dr. Walling and I have more questions to ask, but if
Can I ask a question of the audience? Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a question. It's a thought experiment. I do this often when I'm teaching. There's two parts to the question. The first question is, how would you describe your people, your group? Sometimes that could be familial. Sometimes that could be non-familial. Who do you include? Who do you exclude? So for people to think about that. Because if you can't answer that question, sometimes I think it may be difficult for you to understand when someone else talks about their very family dynamics or non-familial dynamics that are really important to them. So that's something to think about. Maybe someone might want to share.
Well, I can tell, my parents are Polish Jewish Holocaust survivors. And I never went to Poland until last year when Rebecca Brendel, past president of APA, invited me to a conference on medical ethics in Krakow with a trip to Auschwitz. And I said, well, I don't really do concentration camps. And but I did because it was important to do that. And one of the most amazing things about the experience is that I discovered how Polish I am, which is not something about how I thought about myself, because the way we grew up, we were Jews, but we were not Poles, and so Polish people were somebody else. And then I get to this country where everybody is like, they eat the way we ate in the house. And, it was very powerful kind of integrative experience. So that's a great question.
Yeah. And the fact that you answered it that way, I did a consultation at the IPA board, I don't know, 2022 or 2023, I don't really remember. And I went around the room and someone gave the exact same answer you did, but it was Polish and French Jews, but they didn't identify with the Polish Jews. And so what you could see there is a kind of othering that we all do, which is about my next paper, the paper I just was published, about how these things go internally and not from an experience with someone outside.
Yeah. Constance Dunlap.
Yes, good morning. And I wanted to share just a brief experience in response to your question, Dionne, about identification. It's connected to what you shared also, Jack. So in my analysis, my analyst was a white man, identified as white. And for the beginning, for some time in the analysis, I thought he was Jewish and assumed that and related to him as a Jewish man. And later he disabused me of that notion. And it turns out he's from Tennessee. And I'm also from the South. And I think we were connecting, having this Southern connection, but also very divergent experiences in terms of segregation. But it was important to me that I thought that he was Jewish because of my affinity and my identification with struggle and trauma. And that was the thing that I was using to connect with him.
Can we further the question, Constance?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you share with us at what point, emotionally or theoretically, or your theory about when he decided to set the record straight?
I don't know, and this is inviting me to also go back and think about that. What I can say is that, and let me just say this. So one of the things that happened early in the analysis, I was musing about things that protrude, things that recede, things that are Black, things that are white, and he made the interpretation, well, that would make us opposites. And it was a way of addressing race and difference in the room, and it let me know that I could talk about those kinds of things, and he was able to hear them in a way that I was not aware. And so I think that based on what I was dealing with, and I think that, well, one, just being a good analyst, I mean, he wasn't going to just address that question. So he allowed me to use what I needed in the process. And I think at some point later in the analysis, when it was reasonable for him to share his identity, so that we could also process that, my reaction to that and what that meant. And I do know that that was in the latter phase of the analysis.
Thank you.
You had some applause actually as well.
Because my thought is, I'll just say one more thing before Ava. My thought was that your belief about his otherness in being Jewish protected the two of you from the reality of him being a white Southern man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have no more to add.
Before we go to Awa, Dr. Holmes would like to comment on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I find Dr. Dunlap's example and experience so fascinating and so rich. And I would introduce the idea that the analyst's allowing of himself to be viewed as and experienced as Jewish, it was not only important to you, Connie, to do with that whatever you needed to do, but I think it showed a quality of the analyst that we're all looking for, related to disrupting, in a good sense, this collective silence. In other words, that this man could allow himself to be whatever you needed him to be. And so I think the disabusing part is not as interesting to me as the whatever richness came out of him being a Jew to you. It's in contrast to Dionne's example of the analyst who immediately said, I'm not Jewish, I'm white. I mean, I think that not only foreclosed a particular moment, but probably had a great, I would say, unfortunate impact on that analysis. I'm not even sure if the person stayed in that analysis, but it's such a powerful signal of what can't happen, rather than leaving the space open for whatever needs to happen.
Yeah, and that example was jarring to me because of the because of the experience that I had. I mean, that just really, it just foreclosed so much. The example that you gave, Dionne.
Yes. So
And not
a
one
wonderful
more
contrast.
One more thing in relation to Jack's opening question about the gap in publication, and not to speak for Dionne, but just to associate to that. I think the dynamics of what we're talking about would have something to do, or had something to do, with whatever gaps I had in my writing experience. And I did have some. I think we struggle, or I struggled anyway, around, what did I have anything to say, or would it be thought that I had anything to say? The atmospherics, the climate in which one is trying to write matters in terms of whether, there will be receptivity, and other things come into play that maybe encourage us along the way. You mentioned Marian Goldberger, and while she wasn't specifically interested in race, she was interested in other kinds of othering and open. It just had a very open, agile mind, and she was my first supervisor. And so I think it's a complex matter. What occasions are gaps in writing, but when it's about race and other things where there is so much silence, that certainly has some impact on the writer, and what other things we have to do to free ourselves up. And it's not, and maybe it's something to write about in and of itself at some point. Dionne, you and I could get together and do that. But I think it's subtle and nuanced, when we are free to do that, the writing, and when we are not.
So we have a few people who have comments also. Thank you, Dorothy. Really, that was great. Ava, could you tell us where you're from? And
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Eva Glot. I am from Poland, and
hi.
hi. As I know, I don't have any Jewish origin, but I want to be somehow in a dialogue with you, because I think it is very touching and moving process. I grew up in Poland, so in the regime country, under this propaganda. And after the Second World War, we have been told that, of course, some Jewish people were killed. But generally, it was a kind of this silence. Yes, the half of population disappeared. I live out of the Warsaw, close to the Warsaw, but in the city, close to the city, and there was a half Jewish city. And my children going to the school, they have never been told what has happened with this part of generation and the population. And when you said that you are, you didn't realize how much you are Polish, I think that in 2018 we organized, our society organized a EPF conference, European conference. And at that time, there was a very difficult political situation and a lot of anti-Semitic from the regime time. What I want to say, that to being open and not to exclude someone, it is a process. Because I grew up under this propaganda, and I really didn't know how much I discriminate, how much we were, like in the bubble. And before that conference, because of some international discussions, we started a discussion within the group in our society. And because we thought we are very open, we have colleagues who were Jewish origin. For us, it wasn't a problem. But when we start to discuss about some questions and accusation, it was a group process to see how much we exclude in our mind, when we grew up, that how it is a process to be open and to realize how much we are Jewish somehow. Yes, how it is complex and very, very difficult feelings and process. Yes, so I cannot answer to your question, Diane, but I think it is very, very important question and very many ways to find the way to integrate. Yes.
But Ava, you are. I mean, I want to also shout out Ava because she is another member of the IPA board. But you are describing something because there was a lack, an absence
Yes, it was a hole,
that you were
tremendous
curious
hole.
about. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always intriguing to think about the role of silence in trying to not integrate one's history, whether
Yes.
it's the history of being the oppressor or the oppressed. That, the silence is something that serves both sides to a certain extent. That, we don't want to talk about it because it's too painful to talk about. So, that's sort of another dimension to the issue of the silence. And we have a couple of people with comments in the chat. Kofi Adoma, could you turn on your camera, introduce yourself? Are you there?
Certainly. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody.
Where are you?
Yes, I'm in Detroit, Michigan, actually. And I did put a comment in the chat kind of responding to Dr. Powell's question about who are your people? Who are you? And this is what came up for me, all these different identities. And I mentioned these integrated identities because they represent voices that are often not heard or have been silenced, have been oppressed, have been persecuted. And they are also sources of, of joy and resilience as well. And wanted to kind of expand the conversation. I am a psychotherapist, though I'm not a psychoanalyst, but I am a clinical psychologist that did my doctoral studies mainly in psychodynamic psychology back in the 90s, actually. And us graduate cohorts felt that there was something missing. And so we created a committee for the study of culture, class, and mental health to bring outside speakers to come in to talk about culturally responsive ways of working in therapy with underrepresented populations who have been silenced, oppressed, etc. All the things that we're kind of talking about here. And so I'm eclectic in my practice, which is intersectional and taking into consideration race and gender and attractional orientation, gender identity, gender expression, religion, spirituality, socioeconomic status, etc., in addition to personality differences. I work at the Ruth Ellis Center that serves at-risk, unhoused, homeless, mostly Black and brown LGBT plus youth who often get so marginalized that they slip through the cracks. And so this is a 26-year-old organization named after a Black lesbian elder who lived to be 101. But we never hear about their stories unless we're intentionally looking for that. And so our particular agency, the Ruth Ellis Center, we practice what's called, trauma-informed, harm-reductive, culturally responsive care. And we noticed that not all psychologists, mental health providers, really pay attention to some of these identifiers. We put them in our intakes. We put them in our electronic records when our clients come in, that they get to identify themselves. And we've created ways to collect that information, collect that data, and have the conversations between the therapist and the client, but not only the clients, because we work with youth mostly, but between their parents and family members as well, so that it's no longer, the silence is no longer there, and they can talk openly about their various identities, some of which are salient. For example, race might be salient, but if someone is non-binary or trans, a young person may have to outwardly vocalize who they are. Who are they? The essence of who you are. Who are your people? Who are my people? Who do I identify with? And they're the go-tos. Okay, race, certainly. I am also a member of the Association of Black Psychologists, which is pretty much African-centered. And so all of these intersectionality, I have a lot of respect for, because it includes and considers all of the different intersectional privileges as well as areas of oppression. And I use psychology to work with people in my community who often
Kofi, let me interrupt with that. Did you have any thoughts about the paper that it stimulated in you?
Yes, I didn't read the entire paper, but I did, and I've read parts of Dr. Powell's papers in the past, and I have much respect for her work and her insights, and bringing this to the fore. What I really admire about her writing is that she's bringing to attention some let's say, topics that are uncomfortable, and oftentimes the elephant in the room that we may walk around. It's there, it's very much there, and can be very intense, but we as a profession of mental health providers tend not to talk about them. And so she challenges us, she challenges the reader to consider history, which is a layer that oftentimes either that's suppressed, or we have to intentionally go out and find that history, right? And she used, the Nazis, and then if you've read the book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, it brings a lot to the forefront about racism and the practice of racism, and she brings that into the psychoanalytic room and the work that's done. And it totally makes sense. And these are the conversations that, we just haven't had, and that we deserve to have, and we owe it to ourselves to have. We owe it to our clients, our patients to have, so that we can do the work and help support our clients in working through,
Right. So
their.
thank you.
So,
We have
yes.
okay.
Thank you.
Dionne, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I mean, I think when I write, I'm trying to bring the reader in to a potential shared experience. The reason I started the JAPA paper with my experience being in Prague and what happened in that room, there were about 75 analysts there, and they could not speak. They were completely mute. And the reason I started there with that experience was the first time I presented to our society. And it was Anton Hart and I, and we showed the Ralph Greenson Ellis Toney film. And Ellis Toney is the second African American to graduate from a psychoanalytic institute in LA. And Ralph Greenson, the analyst of, I'm not giving anything away, Tony Curtis, Marilyn Monroe, would see him at his office in Beverly Hills. We're talking about the 50s. And he asked to change his Friday appointment because every Friday going to his office, he's a veteran from a small town in the South. And every Friday he was stopped by the LA Police Department and frisked. So he mentioned this to his analyst, Ralph Greenson. And in this film, which is like 20 years after the analysis ended, Ralph Greenson said, I was ignorant. I thought he was paranoid. I thought he was making it all up. But it was true. And we started talking about this in the scientific meeting. The first question that was asked of me was, you did not bring up the Jewish experience. And I thought to myself, I've been to so many presentations about the Holocaust, about all kinds of things. And the fact that this is the first question made me think that it's hard for people to hear if it's not their identity group, whatever that is. And how do we get ourselves to hear? What can bring us in to this collective silence? And that's why I started the JAPA paper the way I did. One, because it was true, it really happened. And after I mentioned Trayvon Martin and the experience, the whole room opened up. And the theme of the Congress was facing the pain, right? So there's something about facing the pain, facing the pain of a silent history, like Ava describes, facing the pain of being told that because of your skin color, you cannot, and you can just fill in the dots. Or based on your sexuality, you are not allowed to da-da-da-da-da. And if we can't, especially in this time where we're so sort of siloed and partisan, if we can't capture this moment where people are knocking on our doors trying to get in for treatment and therapy and understanding and enlightenment, then where are people to go? So as a writer, I think it's really important to, and I do not consider myself a relationalist. I'm an ego psychologist, object relations theorist, and I'm interested in how these early experiences create the bedrock for othering. And it's usually done within our own family. And in my next paper, the one in IJP, I start by having another vignette. I talk briefly about the experience in Prague, but I also talk about an experience walking in my neighborhood. I'm walking down the street, I see a woman, she has her back to me, she has a double stroller, she has a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. I see the 1-year-old and I smile. I love babies, but not in a perverted way. I just love babies. And the baby smiles back at me. The mother turns her head, looks around, and she goes from a nice, quiet, soft face to a grimace. Then the 2-year-old starts grimacing. And then the baby that was smiling just seconds ago starts grimacing. So I'm greeted with this trio of grimaces. That's just a microsecond situation. We don't know what the dynamics of the mother is, but she was signaling something to her child, her children. And what will happen when they engage with others, and what gets internalized? Because the child will use any mechanism possible to stay close to their mother. And we know that now. So there's so much work to be done in this area. And we have to have a kind of empathic lens.
I was just going to add, Beatrice Beebe is going to be doing something with us in June on the Journal Club. She's going to suggest a video that we watch of a mother-child interaction. So you brought that to mind as well. This is interesting. Yeah.
See them now. Look at them now. They're so good.
There's two questions that kind of intersect around the same themes. One that was just posted by Juan in the chat, but Ravi had posted a kind of similar theme a moment ago. Ravi, do you want to ask your question live? Go ahead.
Sure. Hope you can hear me. Yes, and apologies for my informal presentation here. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Powell, for all your work. And
Ravi, tell us where you are and who.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Where are you located?
I'm in San Francisco, California, private practice psychiatrist, volunteer clinical faculty at UCSF as well. Yes. All right. So thank you. Thank you for your work. And I think, coming from the Asian American experience, and probably you're also familiar with racial dissociation, racial melancholia, Shin-Hee Han and David Eng. And I think for me, though I think they primarily talk about melancholia and dissociation primarily as individualized experiences, but perhaps I've got that wrong, but I think of it more as a relational experience. And so this kind of comes up to me as, when seeking help from a presumed similar ethnicity provider, I've had the experience, and other people like Kathy Park Hong in Minor Feelings had the initial experience of seeking help from another Asian American and yet being met with some kind of coldness. And in my case, a sense of power and pathologization of the difficult experience, the challenging experience, the individual experience. And so I think for me, it kind of wraps up in this idea of the psychiatrist or psychotherapist becoming enfolded in systems of power as opposed to systems of suffering and vulnerability and proximity with compassion. So I'm just curious if you have a take on that, how people get kind of enfolded or furthered along that pathway as opposed to opening up the silences and seeing the difficulties that you're talking about. Thank you so much.
Wow. That's a powerful, powerful question, Robbie. Thank you for asking it. Yeah, I mean, I think I have a clinical example of someone, an African American woman, who kept saying, "You know what I mean? You know what I mean?" And yes and no. And Glenn Gabbard asked me for the second edition of his psychotherapeutic treatments, he asked me to be the section editor for two things: sexualities and racial diversity. And I said, Glenn, you're asking me to write something about 3/4 of the planet and sexualities? That's impossible. So I said, can you break that up? And Jack Drescher, you did the section on sexualities. But in that, what we talked about in the introduction is the millions and millions and billions of people that represent Asia. So we broke it up into South Asian and East Asian. And even then, you can't assume. So I resonate with what you're saying, is that as we get higher up in the stratosphere, we can tend to grasp onto this power. And there's several examples in our current politics of seeing that, witnessing that. And how do you stay humble and curious? I can just tell you that when I started my analytic training, one of the other people there said, "Oh, I'm only in analysis because it's a didactic analysis. It's an analysis that will teach me how to be an analyst." And then we were with our group of fellow new people, and I looked at them and I said, and I used the word, but I won't say it here. I said, "I'm pretty effed up. So I want my analysis to really get in there, and I want us to work on that stuff because that's why we're here. That's why people are coming to see us." So I think to be able to resonate with our patients' suffering and also their resilience, I think that that gets so minimized. I have someone now who I'm seeing who's Asian American and has now made tremendous gains, but still feels like they need to short circuit themselves. And it's based on their upbringing, it's based on their relationship and their childhood, but they're making moves. And it feels so uncomfortable to put themselves sort of first. And the same person, when in a room full of Asian people, feels ostracized and feels like an other because they grew up in a non-othered environment where they were the only one. So you have to be able to see who you're relating to and what their relationship is with not just you, but with other people. So it's very hard to negotiate when you're in analytic training because you get assigned supervisors. At least now you can choose your supervisor a little bit easier. You can choose your analyst. People are making moves. If they're not with the right person, if it's not working. So that's a big change.
Mhm.
So thanks for your question, Ravi.
Yeah, Juan Sosa was echoing a similar theme. Their audio evidently is not working, but Juan stated, quote, how might assumptions of shared knowing in same race pairings help or hinder the therapeutic depth, depth for instance, in non-POC and POC pairings. They go on to say, as a Mexican American from a quote, not very privileged background, I find that my Spanish speaking psychotherapy patients generally come from incredibly privileged backgrounds and they make assumptions about my background. And I assume, due to my professional identity, and I have at times struggled to challenge those assumptions in the therapy setting. And when I've tried to explore this, I've had patients stop coming and lost them to follow up. Appreciate your comments, they state.
Can you read the last part of that?
Yeah. So, as a Mexican American from a not very privileged background, I find that my Spanish speaking psychotherapy patients generally come from incredibly privileged backgrounds. They make assumptions about mine, I assume, due to my professional identity, and I've struggled to challenge those assumptions in the therapy setting. And when they try to explore it, the patients stop coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because that happens. But I do think the exploration is worth taking. And also I think that what Dorothy said is really significant in that we're not supposed to immediately answer. I mean, my patients have all kinds of fantasies of my background. I've heard several things like my office is on Central Park West, so my last name is Powell. So you have to be in New York City. If you're Black, you have to be from the Caribbean because no African American can actually rise to this level of prominence. Questions about socioeconomics, all kinds of things. But what would it mean if your patient could actually realize that your upbringing was closer to the help they have at home than to theirs. That's really hard for people. There was something on the news last night about people who come from privileged backgrounds. The question is, did I deserve this? Did I work for this? Or was this something given to me generationally? So there's a question about being a kind of imposter, whether I actually earned this, as opposed to you in your current status. That might be very difficult. So I'm asking us to look beneath the surface at what some of the underlying dynamics could be behind the difficulty exploring their privilege.
It's also how, if I might add, the intersection not only of race, but the intersection with class.
Sure.
Like how class differences can play a major role, particularly those of us who have worked our way up, if you will, into, the professional world, who don't come from professional backgrounds and suddenly discover so many things about what the world that we never knew before we got there.
Mhm. Yeah, Dorothy Holmes even comments along the same lines, the still, quote, prevalent use of the term training analysis perpetuates keeping distance from one's and our system's deepest issues.
We still have another 10 minutes, and if there's anybody else in the audience who would like to address a comment or a question to Dr. Powell, that would be great. Yes, Dr. Powell?
So I have another thought experiment. I like thought experiments because it gets us thinking about what happens after this meeting is over, and for the people who might look at the video later. So my next question is, and you don't have to answer, but maybe hopefully answer in your own mind. What was the first experience where you felt othered? And it's usually something that immediately comes to mind. You don't really have to even think about it. And once you have that answer in yourself, when was the first time you othered someone else? Which is typically the harder question, because it asks us to align with the aggressor. But there's usually an answer there too.
We have Robin Rayford raising her hand.
Yes. Am I on?
You're
Okay,
unmuted.
yes.
Sure,
Hi, everybody. I love this discussion so far. And I'm gonna start with the first question, Dr. Powell, that you asked us about who are your people. And I was thinking yesterday, my husband, who's right here, Stan, and I went to it's called a clam bake in our town, 2,500 people. And all the politicians are there from the state and the governor. It's like a big deal.
Where are
And
you,
so
Robin?
in Maryland,
You should have
in
told me. I would
Crisfield,
have come
Maryland.
down.
Okay, next year, it's every year. So so anyway, and helicopters are flying around, all the stuff. And so when we went there, we have all of these choices of what group are we going to join. And so in answering your question, I realized that, okay, the blacks are over here, really the whites are here, the politicians are here, the elites are here. And so we know people in all the groups. So where did we feel most comfortable? At least I'm speaking for myself. The loving group, right? People who are open and curious, and they're open to learn. They would be accepting of me and others. And so I thought that's where I belong. And we ended up sitting with this group. Well, there were it was a diverse group, but I think they had the Christians maybe were the majority of this group. And it was maybe a group of 20 people. And so I was looking for a friend who belongs to the elite group. So we were going over there, and the first person I saw right before we entered that tent was this big guy who he's a white guy, and we're on the same team committee in the city, and he doesn't speak to me. And so just meeting face to face with him stopped me in my tracks. And then I didn't want to go to the tent of the elites. And so I think, to respond to your second question, now I othered everybody else in the elite table because I didn't want to go to that tent.
Yeah.
And I think the only way that we can do this thing, I mean, I was conflicted, and this is helpful, is to give voice to all of these thoughts and feelings that we have. And coming from like a Christian perspective or in the church, you know, what we do is we sing songs, we preach messages, we do all of these basic things, and that helps us to kind of resist where I was, despair or disappointment, you know, or just moving forward. And so I'm doing that right now, just kind of giving voice to what happened.
That's really important, Robin, because I think we do that all the time. We have one experience and they spread it out to include an entire group, which is why I wanted to include the example in the paper of working with this man who was having these strokes in the hospital, because this was Cornell, pretty top-notch care. And why was he still symptomatic? But there was, even before meeting him, there was a certain pattern to his strokes. You know, when the Latinx pulmonologist came, he had a stroke. When the South Asian infectious disease person came, he had another stroke. He finally was asked if he wanted a priest, and when the Chinese priest with the clerical collar came in, he had another one. And so then they asked him, and it didn't happen with the people who brought him his meals, took him for his tests, because they fit, in terms of Don Moss's sort of racial mapping paper, they fit where he thought they should be located. They were African American, they were Black, and they were servants. They were to help. That fit his profile. But these other people coming into his room, claiming that they're the doctor, claiming that they're a priest, that messed with his head. So when I came into the room, he was starting to get flush. And I said, originally I called him Mr. X for the Confederacy. The editors didn't like that, so I had to change, I think, to Mr. J. Mr. J, I get it. Just give me a second to explain. You don't, you just want to be treated by white doctors or white priests. And I watched him as he visibly calmed down. And he asked if he could be transferred to a place in the hospital where his origins are in Northern Europe. And I said to him at the time, I said, I think there's a lot of Kenyans and Africans there and a lot of other Asian people there. So I don't really think there's an escape from what you're experiencing. And, you know, that was over, I don't know, 30 years ago. Now there is a place to escape. You can escape on the internet, right? And so how do we reach people who may not actually come to see us because of whatever this demeanor is? I see there's a hand up, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, we have time for one more question. If you could just make it quick for Kenneth Thompson. Kenneth.
I also see Lauren Edmonds too.
Okay.
Kenneth, make it quick. Unmute yourself, however, there you go.
Yes, I will. And I'm happy to have the other person go, but I will be very, very fast. I'm just wondering if there's possibility of a transcendent identity that allows us to address all these Venn diagrams of identity that we see in our patients and that we contain in ourselves. that somehow allows us to escape the histories that are really very, very problematic. And I don't want to escape the histories. We have to keep them in mind, but to maybe rise above them. And I'm just wondering where you think that identity is, or is it even achievable? And if we don't have that identity, what is it that ultimately allows us to have a connection with each other?
Wow, it's going to be hard for me to answer that. I just came back from a situation where people were talking about AI and how AI will replace us collectively, where we don't have to think about our identities or empathy or the other. And I think it's really time for us to be able to break down. And I mean, I've always been curious. I mean, once I decided that I sort of like people and want to try to understand them, that I've seen just the benefits of being able to approach these resistances. And it furthers that. The Holmes Commission furthers the work. The trauma workshop furthers the work. Knowing what Dr. Adoma is doing in Detroit furthers our ability. I keep reminding myself that when Nelson Mandela was released after being the longest political prisoner on the planet, political prisoners around the world were able to find that he had been released and allowed them to continue to live another day. Now, that was pre-internet. So how can we be able to communicate with each other like we're doing now in a way that breaks down those barriers and allows us to get closer? I imagine us as therapists, we are fire people for the mind. You know, you have firemen, firewomen. We go places where other people are running away.
We're going to have to stop.
Oh, can we just have Lauren Edmonds?
Sure, Lauren, go ahead. Show
Hi.
your
Yeah.
face.
Apologies for not being on video. I'm not quite presentable yet. I'm located though out of Denver, Colorado, and I will be as quick as possible. So I wanted to circle back to Dr. Powell's thought experiment question when she asked when the first time you felt othered and when is the first time you've othered someone else. And I could immediately think of the first time I was othered. It was around the first grade. I was in the bathroom washing my hands. I approached the sink and there was a white child, because at this time, first grade, so we're children. And she said to me, "Don't touch me." And I said, "Why?" And she's like, "Because you're Black." So that was the first time I've ever felt othered. And luckily, one of my best friends was there to come to my defense. But then when I was thinking about the first time that I'd othered someone else, I was really struggling to figure out when that might have been. And I stereotype people all the time. And basically, I suppose my question is simply like, are there categories of othering? Because when it comes to the little girl in first grade, that seemed like malicious othering, right? Like she was basically saying I was the bad thing. But when I'm trying to think about how I other people, I can't think of a time that I've done it in such like a malicious, intentional way. So that just caused me to kind of expand on the question. And I was wondering, like, the short question is, are there categories of othering? But also just to like challenge the question in a little bit of like, what does othering mean? So that's all. And I don't think you can answer that in like 30 seconds.
Only to say that I'm really glad that you asked the question and presented the dilemma, because maybe that means that we're starting to get things right with earlier generations, because people are now much more forward facing, and that's what I'm seeing in analytic institutes. People are challenging. They're challenging us. They're asking us to step up. And so, and to get rid of the malignant toxicity. We don't need it anymore. We already see the effects of it. So thank you for providing us something that we can try to attain, where we can identify being, we struggle to identify being malignantly toxic. So thank you.
Dionne, do you have any closing comments before we close out?
I just want to appreciate and thank you all for spending your time with us and keeping the dialogue open. I think you have my way of contact. Jack, Chris, thanks for making it possible. The IPA, the symbol, the man behind the symbol, thank you for making it happen. And let's just keep it going. And wherever we are, whatever place. I'll just give one small example of being a psychoanalyst. I was on a tour of an African tour in Lisbon. Dorothy Holmes was with me. We took a pause and we were just fielding questions. And one person said they went to a museum, and in the museum, the Africans in Portugal, there's no census really. So there's no way of figuring out how many Africans are and where they're from. But there was a photography exhibit showing African people in Portugal just living their lives, playing, going to school, having picnics, things like that. A certain segment of the government were really opposed to these pictures. So they took them down and they put up an exhibit showing the history of the sardines. And the person was asking, why would they do that? Why would they not want to show African people who live in Portugal, love in Portugal, just being regular families? And I volunteered that there's a movement to try to have us think back to another way, another African experience, being packed like sardines on a slave ship. And sometimes those images are what people want to think is in mind. When someone says, I see a Black pilot and I get nervous, I see a Black pilot and I feel relieved because I know the things that they've gone through. I see a trans pilot, I am relieved. A female pilot, I am relieved. I know what they've had to go through to reach that, and it wasn't a DEI hire. So I just want to end with that. So thank you.
So I want to thank everybody. I was thinking, we have our last slide. Just wanted to remind everybody that we have 5 more journal clubs this academic year, and the next one will be in December 12th, where Anne Durkol will be talking about a chapter from her 2-volume biography of Clara Thompson, speaking of pioneers, in terms of first women, in the field. And so thank you all. Thank you, Dionne. Thank you, everybody who spoke up. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we stay on a little longer?
We have
hop on another link
for another Zoom for the 3 of us. It's in your email and it's in your messages. Okay.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Bernard. And seeing you.